They left you, and maybe it nearly destroyed you. But don't scroll. Not now, because what you're about to hear isn't a message. It's Jesus speaking into the wound they left behind. This video is the conversation your soul has needed, but never got to finish. So stay. Don't miss what heaven prepared for you. My beloved child, I saw it happen. I saw them walk away. Maybe they left quietly, or maybe they slammed the door on your heart. Maybe they ghosted you without a word, or maybe they said too much, and all of it cut deeper than you deserved. But I want you to hear me clearly. You were not too much. You weren't too broken. You weren't too clingy. You weren't the reason they left. And no matter how many people gave up on you, I never did. Let me tell you a story about a man named Theo. Theo loved hard. Every relationship, he gave his all. Until one day, the person he trusted most just disappeared. No warning, no goodbye, just silence. Blocked on every platform. Left to wonder if everything was fake. And that night, alone in his apartment, Theo didn't just lose someone. He lost parts of himself. He questioned everything. His worth, his value, even me. Why didn't you stop them from leaving? He whispered in the dark. But I didn't answer with thunder. I answered with presence. A song came on from a playlist he didn't remember saving. It said, "You are still chosen. You are still mine." And tears came, because in that moment, he realized, even if people walk away, I stay. I stayed when your father left, that I stayed when your friends betrayed you, that I stayed when your marriage fell apart, that I stayed through the heartbreak you never told anyone about. I didn't walk out, that I sat with you in the wreckage. Because love, real love stays. Though my father and mother forsake me, I will receive you. That's from Psalm chapter 27, verse 10. You're not just abandoned, you're adored. Let me tell you about a single mom named Raina. Her husband left when their daughter was 2. Just left. One day he was there, the next day he was gone. No explanation, just silence. She had to be strong because she didn't have a choice. But behind closed doors she wept, and she asked me over and over, why would you let someone promise forever and give up halfway? And every night when she tucked her daughter in, she whispered a prayer. Don't let her feel what I feel. And I heard her, not with a booming voice, but with steady provision. She never missed a rent payment. Her daughter never missed a meal. Peace came, not all at once, but like sunlight after rain. Raina didn't see me show up, but she lived it, because I stayed, and I'm staying for you too. Maybe someone left you in a moment when you needed them most. Maybe you're still waiting for an apology that'll never come. But child, that apology won't heal you. Only my presence will. So let me say what they never did. I'm sorry they broke your trust. I'm sorry they didn't fight for you. That I'm sorry they left you carrying a weight they helped create. But I'm not them. I don't abandon, that I don't give up when it gets messy, that I don't leave when you fall apart. I stay. You were never alone in that room where you cried. You were never forgotten in that season where everyone moved on. I saw you, that I still do. You're not invisible, that you're not unworthy, that you're not easy to leave. You are mine, and nothing that had changed that. I want you to breathe now. Let my love be louder than their absence. And just in case you doubt whether this was truly for you, let me remind you of something. You didn't find this video. This video found you, because I sent it. You've been running through life, trying to pretend you're okay, trying to prove to the world and yourself that their absence doesn't define you. But child, your worth was never tied to who stayed or who left. It was always found in me. I chose you when no one else even noticed you, that I stayed when the room got empty. And I will still be here when you finally let go of pretending. Because when you collapse, I catch you. When you scream into the dark, I hear you. When you wonder if anyone still cares, I do. And I'm not saying that just to comfort you. I'm saying it because it's the truth. They may have left, But I stayed, and I always will. You're still here. That means something, you know. After everything they did, after everything they didn't do, you didn't give up. You didn't stop believing that maybe, just maybe, someone would still stay. Someone would still see you. That someone is me. You see, when they left, there was more than just silence. There was debris, a mess, the shattered pieces of your confidence, your joy, even your faith. And that's when I moved even closer. I didn't wait for you to pray the perfect prayer. I didn't require you to perform or prove yourself. I came into the middle of your sorrow. Do you remember that moment you thought, I can't do this anymore, but somehow you still got up the next day? That was me, holding you, strengthening you, whispering, I know this hurts, but I'm still here. There was a moment when Elijah, one of my prophets, felt so abandoned that he asked me to let him die. He said, I've had enough. And do you know what I did? I didn't rebuke him. I fed him. I let him rest. And I spoke in a whisper. You're not weak because you feel broken. You're not faithless because you've asked. Why did they leave? You're human, and I created your heart. So I know exactly how to restore it. Let me tell you about someone named Jordan. Jordan was a youth pastor, passionate, kind, and hopeful. But one day, a group of people he loved turned against him. Rumors spread, lies were believed, and just like that, everything he built crumbled. He lost his church, he lost his friendships, he even started losing his sense of purpose. One night, sitting in his car in the church parking lot he no longer belonged to, he whispered, Jesus, do you still want me? And I answered, I never stopped. Not long after, Jordan began rebuilding. Not in the spotlight, not for applause, but from the inside. He mentored quietly. He helped broken teens. He rediscovered me, not just in ministry, but in stillness. And I did the same for him that I want to do for you. I'm not rebuilding the same version of you. I'm building something stronger. Yes, they left, but sometimes I allow exits to make room for healing. Sometimes the breaking had to happen so the blessing could finally fit. I know you miss them. I know there's still a part of you that replays what you could have said, could have done, could have fixed. But child, hear me. You were never the villain in their story. You were just a chapter they didn't know how to honor. And I'm writing something new. In the aftermath of their absence, I'm giving you something better than closure. I'm giving you clarity. You don't need their words to validate your healing. You need my presence to restore your identity. And I'm doing it. Even now, the reason this hurts so deeply is because you loved so deeply. And that's not something to be ashamed of. I designed you with a heart that feels, with a soul that hopes, with a spirit that longs for connection. So when the ones you trusted disappear, I step in to remind you, you are always worthy of staying for. Even if they didn't say goodbye, let me say what they never had the courage to. You mattered more than I showed. You didn't deserve the silence. You didn't deserve the blame. And I'm sorry for leaving. Now let me speak over you something better. I'm here. I'm staying. And I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever. You don't have to chase anymore. You don't have to perform. You don't have to beg to be chosen. Because in my kingdom, you already are. And nothing they said, did, or abandoned can rewrite what I've already declared. You are mine, and I delight in you. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a breath. Let me pray over you, not as a distant God, but as the one who never left your side. My beloved child, I speak peace over your anxious thoughts. I speak healing over the places they broke. I speak rest into the corners of your soul that haven't stopped fighting. You don't need to be strong right now. You just need to be still. Let me be your shelter. Let me be your comfort. Let me be enough. I bind up the lies they left behind, the voices that say you're not enough, not wanted, not worth staying for. And I replace them with my truth. You are chosen. You are seen. You are deeply, eternally loved. Even now, as tears fall or silence lingers, I am wrapping you in my presence. And when this video ends, I will still be here, because I am the God who stays, and I am the shepherd who carries you home. In my name, with all of heaven's love, amen.